Vosh mind how going into race or ethnicity as a method of identification with yourself is different from gender as a means of doing the same, unironically not coming from bad faith. Yeah, okay. So so listen. Here's the really quick paint stream, then I read the rest of the donos, then I leave. Okay? Really quick. Okay? Watch this. JLP is Jesse Lee Peterson. Okay. Okay. Watch this, my friends. So I'm going to talk about transracialism like as a concept super duper quickly. Okay? So look. All right. First, I am going to showcase the art. You just did a thing. Hold on. Only if it's a good meme. If it's a bad meme, I'm not showing it off, okay? Wait, which meme is yours? Marf? How am I supposed to know which meme is yours? Jesus Christ, this guy keeps spamming the same picture. Ew. Fucking weirdos. Huh. Alright, anyway. Let's do this super quick, okay? So first I'm going to establish a parallel between transness and transracialism, okay? Really quick, okay? So for transness, you have two disparate characteristics that are linked, all right? You have sex and gender. Okay, so I'm going to draw like a cucumber for the sex. See? That's like a cucumber, okay? And some big melons. Okay? Look, we get the idea, all right? Provide your evidence that people didn't consider Irish people white. It's easy to make your claims very authoritatively, like a sophist. Why do all of you right-leaning dipshits use the exact same language? Brand Netanyan. The evidence that Irish people... History of Irish as white people. If this is like unironically... Because you're a sophist? Do you even know what that means? This is a book. I don't want a book. Who reads books? There you go. Read your fucking meme. There. Go get some fucking education. I just Googled when the Irish weren't right, and there. I gave it to you, okay? Like, this is unironically such a fucking ubiquitous point. Just go read. Jesus Christ. Academic source? Yeah, please. Other people do. This is so fucking, like, beneath my time. Yes, Irish people weren't considered white. Yes, they were racially and ethnically discriminated against. Yes. Jesus. I know it doesn't, like, support your point to believe that, but okay. Anyway, in regards to this, all right, and then we've got gender. And gender is stuff like, here's a pretty pink bow. And, here's a gun? I don't know. What do boys like? Here's a gun. Okay? So, sex and gender. Okay? So, sex refers very, very simply to the set of physiological, biological characteristics that one obtains in the process of living. They exist outside of society. They describe physiological elements. These are things like primary and secondary sex characteristics, hormone development, that kind of stuff. Gender refers to social ascriptions as to what the sex roles should be turned into. So, for example, it is a sexual characteristic that typically females give birth. That's usually one of the characteristics we use to define females, in fact, in a sexual context. So it is then a gendered expectation that women should be the caregivers, that females should be the caregivers. So that's how sex and gender are tied in that respect. Sex and gender, physiological, and cultural. Okay? Easy peasy. Super duper. All right. I can only deal with so many brain worms, my friend. All right. So that's sex and gender. So now let's go to race. Okay? So here's race. Okay? Poyo said have a good faith discussion on this. Amazing. Okay, so racial physiological characteristics are pretty minor and pretty simple. Okay, so really you've got basically like skin color and like maybe like Chinese people got like slanty eyes and black people got bigger noses. Like that's pretty much it. So for here, I'll just call this bio and social. Okay? So for bio, we've got, I can't draw anything here without it literally looking like racial stereotypes, okay? Like like if I just draw like big noses or something. Okay, hold on. Okay, here, I've got it. Okay, hold on. We're doing our best over here, okay? Give me a nice flesh tone. There. Okay, easy. So anyway, is it really a good idea to draw a strong distinction between the bio and social stuff? Yes, absolutely, because there's a huge distinction, and not reinforcing that distinction is one of the things that fucks over trans people the most. Okay, and then we have social stuff. Okay, what's a social indicator of race? Fuck me, fucking racial stereotypes. Okay, listen, this is a mayo jar. You're just gonna have to fill in the blanks here. Okay. And here's a fucking boxed edition of StarCraft 2, okay? There you go. Social. Okay? Easy. All right? You can get it. White, Korean. Okay. So now let's look at how this works with transgender people, okay? So there are two groups of people here, and I've distinguished here in the past. So the sexual distinction between assigned male at birth and assigned female at birth people is pretty substantial. It's not huge. We're the same species. We get along. We're very identical in very many ways. But there are substantial differences for the most part. Though, again, sex is bimodal, not binary, blah, blah, blah. We get the gist, okay? So there are transsexual people who want to go from this to this. That operates entirely within the sex, okay? And there are transgender people who want to go from this to this. Usually, these two things correlate. Usually, a person who is transsexual, somebody who wants to transition physically, who has wants to, like have sexual characteristics which ascribe them to the other sex. And then you have transgender people who want to sort of take on the social roles that are ascribed to the other gender. So a non-binary person who is not dysphoric would be transgender but not transsexual, because they would want to hold themselves to a different identity and different social and cultural elements than their assigned gender. But they're totally cool with their sex. Yes, Blair White would be a transsexual person and a transgender person. So that's the example here. So that's the parallel here. Most transgender people are also transsexual, at least to my mind, currently. But not all transgender people are transsexual. And the vast majority of transsexual people are transgender. So that's sort of the dichotomy that works here, okay? So for an example of a transsexual person, think of somebody who wants to have sexual reassignment surgery or hormones or whatever to get their body to sort of physiologically be different. And for a transgender person, think of somebody who wants to adopt social roles, identity, and performative sort of gestural behaviors which are more reminiscent of a gender which is not their own. So, or that ascribes to a gender other than that which they were assigned at birth, right? Okay. So that's how transness works in the purview of sex and gender. Now let's go over here to race, okay? So we need to find differences between how this works with trans people and how this would work with transracial people, okay? So here's problem number one. There's not really any like transracial people in the same way that there are transsexual people. So there aren't people who like feel dysphoric about their race and want to have surgeries to have to be another race. Okay. So maybe there are like a few examples, maybe, or something like that. But like generally speaking, there aren't like hundreds of thousands or millions of people who are like born black with like a big nose and dark skin or whatever. And they're like, fuck that, I want to be white. And then they get like their nose shaped down and they have skin bleaching surgeries and shit like that. That doesn't really happen. Now there are ways in which people of a given race will alter their appearance to fit in line with the beauty standards that are set sort of by a Western framework. For example, like skin bleaching surgery from Indian women, for example, would be a pretty good example. But I consider that different because that's born of a desire to fit cultural pressures rather than an innate physiological discomfort with one's biological characteristics. So there doesn't really seem to be a parallel here in regards to like the transsexual people, but with race. Okay. So that thing doesn't really seem to exist. And in terms of the social roles here we have a little bit more legitimacy. Okay. So if you're like black and you're born in the projects and you want to like embody a certain set of characteristics, so you speak like a white person and you dress like a white person and you act like a white person, then you do get shit on for it. This is a real thing. Sometimes black people will kind of like shit on one another for that. That's a real thing. So there is some pressure being put there for people to sort of fit in with the cultural elements that are representative of their race, you know? Likewise with white people. Some people in the chat earlier were making wigger jokes, like unironically. Like if a white person do-rags and wears their pants down low and so on and so forth, then they are kind of like mimicking the cultural elements of being black, but they aren't like getting their skin dyed brown. You know what I mean? So the social element here I think is valid. Now here's the critical difference, okay? I am in favor of race and gender abolitionism right here. So this shit, being transgender in a society of my design, this wouldn't be a thing because gender wouldn't exist. Like this literally wouldn't be conceptually possible. You couldn't be transgender in my society because there is no gender. You can be transsexual because that seems to be physiological, but transgender, no, that wouldn't exist because there's no fucking gender. Where are you getting that shit from? And likewise, because I want to live in a transracial society, down here with this shit, there wouldn't be any associations between like a person's skin color and the kind of like social performative behaviors they would be expected to engage in. So in terms of the social elements of both race and sex, I don't care for these things. I don't want there to be these associations because I think they're inherently like oppressive as a framework. So fuck that shit, you know? Now with the abolition of these things, that leaves us with sex and the biology of race. Sex, again, there are sexually dysphoric people who, even outside gender expectations, are born with a big floppy and want to have a gazongos. But in terms of the biology of race, there doesn't really seem to be an equivalent. What's more, the differences between the sexes are far more substantial than the differences between the races. So my argument would be that there is no real benefit to considering transracialism to be legitimate because A, the extent to which people can behave in ways that are not typically ascribed to their racial group is, while still somewhat ostracized within society, nowhere near as great as the equivalent in gender. So if you're assigned male at birth, if you're a white person who's assigned male at birth, dressing up in a dress and like being transgender is going to get you a fuckload more shit socially than like, I don't know, getting grills or like talking in AAVE. Like they'll both get you shit, but I think the gender end of things, like there's not like an epidemic of like wiggers getting like shot and killed for their fucking behavior. You know what I mean? Like that's not a thing. So I don't think that's a thing. I assume that's not a thing. Right? I mean, I assume. If it is, I'll... but anyway, so that, and also the consequences for deviation just don't seem to be as severe. People who are black but act white, people who are white but act black, these people don't seem to have lived experiences so substantially different from that of people who sort of act within their racial expectations that they deserve to be called transracial. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like a valid categorization. They can do what they want, and I respect them doing what they want. I feel like calling a white person transracial for speaking AAVE is kind of fucking weird. And I think calling a black person transracial for like speaking the way I speak and like wearing a fucking like sweater over a button-up shirt, I think that'd be kind of fucking weird, you know? I think that'd be strange. I don't know if that would like solve anything or help anyone, you know? And in regards to the biological elements of things, people seem to want to change their sex. That's the thing people live and die for. No one really seems to want to do that with race. So that's my argument. Okay, does that make sense? It's a little bit like complicated or whatever, but like, do you really want to be calling people transracial because they don't act their race? That's a little fucking weird. Vosh, I agree that their lived experience doesn't parallel the equivalent of trans people do with gender, but I'd argue from an empirical perspective, transracialism could be true. There's no such thing as empirical perspective on how a social construct is handled, but like, I don't know what you mean by, like, Poyos, who would be transracial? Would like an Asian person who talks black because they live in the projects be transracial? Would you go walk up to them and be like, hello, my transracial comrade? And then you'd expect them to be like categorized differently in like the like in the fucking census or something? Like, you know what I mean? I'm genuinely curious. I'm not asking in bad faith. Vosh, I think that makes sense only because it's not possible to change the race. If it was, then racists will look at the typical black behavior and detect the true race. I don't know. I mean, racists have been calling people race traitors for acting like undesirables for a very long time. Vosh, were you ever right-leaning when you were younger? Have you always been on the left? I was like a fucking edgy libertarian until I ended high school. Amazing. I would argue that someone who is mixed black-white but appears white enough to be treated white could be considered transracial if they have a contrary to the right expectation, Vosh. I guess that actually is a distinction here that does not really exist here. And you can be between racial groups in a way that you can't really with sex. Like, you can be intersex. In fact, it's possible to have a pretty much perfect 50-50 split between presentable female and male characteristics. However, society is usually going to treat you as one or the other. However, because interracial people are heavily discriminated against and also not that common. Yes? You can come in.
I'm not going to come in. I'm in my underwear.
Okay, just shout your point.
Okay, but around the time of the Rachel Dolezal...
Louder.
Around the time of the Rachel Dolezal stuff, there was a lot of talk around transracialism, and transracialism is actually a thing, but it doesn't mean the same thing. It means, or has been used by people who are of a different race, adopted by other race parents. So, like, if a white kid was adopted by black parents, there's some
louder
stuff where they call themselves transracial, but it's more complicated. It's not like they don't actually think they're that race. It's a complicated thing. It kind of got co-opted, you know?
Okay, I will reiterate. So what my beloved partner and big booby human was saying was that transracialism has been used in the past to describe like mixed race adoptions and how like you ascribe social roles to people who are brought up in an upbringing that is of one race, but they are themselves a member of a different race. Okay, anyway, like, okay, fucking, this is dumb. All right. At the end of the day, Ray Rose Show has a good video on transracialism, implying I care what other people think on anything I want to talk about. Whatever, listen, okay, all I'm trying to get at here is that race and gender are different types of social constructs that should be handled in different ways. I don't know if there's much benefit to like ascribing the term transracial to someone, and if there is, it would be nothing like the way in which people like from the PragerU video try and describe transracialism, where they're like, transracialism is when you're clearly a white person, but then you say you're black, and since white and black are different, that means you're transracial. You're ignoring reality. Like that's a different type of transracial than anything there might be a legitimate. What I'm trying to do here is that I'm trying to explain why, broadly speaking, people don't treat transracialism in the same way they would treat transness. You know what I mean? Like that, like why those are distinct categories that don't fit within the same box that well. That's what I am doing here. So if transracialism does exist, it does not exist in the context that people like fucking far-right people will use it, where they try and argue that it's people eschewing reality and just identification is all that matters. There's no empirical reality. Okay. Vosh, would you consider the difference between transracial and transgender primarily based on the lived experiences of people rather than a fundamental difference in the social constructs? The only thing, well, no, because there's still no racial dysphoria. But if there was racial dysphoria, yeah, I guess I would. I would consider that to be Israfil and Libertador, you can do your praxis forum thing, but I gotta be careful about who I associate with. I mean, I think my example would be racial dysphoria, Vosh. No, dysphoria is a deep-seated physiological discomfort with your body. I'm not comfortable with the term dysphoria being applied to like a socially constructed conundrum over racial identity. I think that I do not accept that equivocacy. Anyway, I have to be careful about who I associate with concerning like praxis shit, because I know you motherfuckers are going to start talking about Molotov bombing police stations, and I do not want to be associated with that, because we are very anti-political violence on this stream, comrades. All right.